and I want to start a conversation by sharing my screen. I'm gonna share my screen because this is
Okay.
pretty darn impressive.
Curious what's going to happen now.
No, darn. Okay, I'm gonna share my entire screen, which is always a little bit scary. But this is what happened this week. So all these issues and features and bug fixes were in, and this is very impressive. And this is mostly thanks to you. So
Well,
yeah, you should give yourself a pat on the back.
well, I guess it's mostly because I have the time to do it full time, right? Thanks to Akia. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to do so much.
But yeah, thanks to Akia for that. But in any case, you deserve a lot of credit, right? Because by getting things right at the first try, we get to do more without having to go back and forth in review, and so that's been.
The contrib issue queue is faster than the core issue queue, even for experimental modules.
Right. Yeah. So that's why we want to get this stuff in before we do more advancement, which leads us into I guess that there is nothing to report this week because I assume that that core contributors and framework managers, etc., may still be on vacation or may have a pile of other things to do. So it may be expected that there is no news. So.
Yep, but the time is getting a little bit short though, because I don't know the exact date, but basically by the end of January, we have to have JSON API committed to Drupal 8.3 as an experimental module, because that's the time where it becomes marked as a beta, and so no more new stuff is added, only bug fixes are accepted to 8.3, stabilizing 8.3 basically. So that it makes sense, but it means that we have about 3 weeks left, and so exactly because of that, I've been working today on the next steps. So I updated the plan issue. You posted your Twitter poll results, which I didn't notice because I saw your tweet on my phone, and I use the non-official Twitter app, so I didn't notice it was a poll. It's cool to see that there were 127 votes and 70% saying. So that's 90 people out of 127 saying that they would they would choose Drupal as their backend more likely, thanks to JSON API being in core, if that actually happens, of course. So it's a strong vote of confidence, I think.
Right. Yes. There's something to say though.
Okay.
That then I realized that, of course, after carefully crafting that question, it was still ambiguous, and you could read it as, if JSON API was in core, would it increase the chance of you using JSON API for your backend needs? But in any case, I think that both interpretations have, it's a good thing. The results are a good thing with both interpretations. So.
Yeah, I interpreted it as the first one. So
that was my intent.
JSON API being in core doesn't make you more likely to use Drupal 8 as your backend for your application. So, and I think that makes it such a broad question, as in, does this cause you to adopt Drupal 8? That's how I interpret it, basically. And if that really has such numbers, as in 70% voting yes, that's impressive. So we'll see. We'll have to wait in any case, right?
Right. Yeah. And as noted there, it's completely unscientific.
Yeah. Of course.
Because people that follow me may be into this stuff already, or they just don't. They know that I'm into this, and they don't want to downvote me and whatever.
Well, I didn't vote, so there's that. Like, I mean, some people will simply not vote.
Yeah.
I didn't even notice it was a poll. So, yeah.
I set it for a week, and then realized that it only lasts some scroll, and then people don't vote anymore. But you can retweet yourself, and I did that like midweek, and I got a bunch of votes in that. So yeah, you were saying that you will work on a plan.
Yes, I have been working on that already. So if you
Nice.
go and look at, so I haven't posted anything yet, but what I have been doing is reading through the details on this page, and specifically this section. So that's a page talking about experimental modules in Drupal 8. And then within that page, the section that says, what requirements must an experimental module meet? And so essentially it boils down to this. It can't disrupt anything. There must be basic documentation. It must meet coding standards. The UI can be minimal, not yet perfect. We don't have a UI, so that's not a concern of ours. But nothing has to be perfect, essentially. So the basics have to be there. The architecture also doesn't have to yet be perfect, but it needs to be working, show what it can do, and have follow-up issues, have plans for the next steps on basically a plan to move it from the current experimental state to a stable state. And so that's the thing. That's what we have to achieve. And so the issues that I've been working on this past week are about refactoring but I think that the most crucial bit of technical data was in the JSON API module. So the resource config and resource manager thing versus plugin manager, and how that all interacts with routes and so on. And so that's mostly done now. There's 2 remaining patches, one of which is fairly major. The other one is pretty tiny. And so I've created a new patch to fix the coding standards. So to meet the Drupal coding standards, it's a trivial patch. So that's one more gate that we have to meet for an experimental module to be acceptable. So that would be trivial.
Have you done that manually or automatically?
I've done it, well, automatically in the sense that I ran the tool, but manually in the sense that I just made the changes manually that it required me to make. Nothing else, just exactly those changes that were requirements, so nothing out of scope. But it was, I just wanted to see where the problems were at, so I wanted to do it manually just because of that. Okay,
cool. I was asking to know if you were going through a process of fine gray combing, like
no, not yet. No. Okay. So it was just those things, because I did see other things like the default add package thing that your IDE has added everywhere. Like those, I think we ideally need to clean up as well. But like that's not a big thing. We can do that if the committers ask for that. So that's all the super basic stuff, and I'm working on a plan issue. But so that's the thing I wanted to get your opinion on. So looking at the remaining code in the JSON API module, there's quite a few sub namespaces, if you will. So if you look at the JSON API module in the source directory, you have the following namespaces: access, context, controller. That's one I'm adding in the last patch in the patch series. So access, context, controller, encoder, error, event subscriber, field, link manager, normalizer, param converter, query, resource, resource type, and routing. So that's quite a few, and several of them I think are. So I think an easier way to look at the JSON API module and look at its state is to look at those different namespaces and look at the code within those namespaces. I think like 4 to 5 of those namespaces don't have any remaining concerns. Like they're completely done, solid, nothing remains. But I think the other part, so I think, yeah, about half, maybe something like 8 to 9 or so of those namespaces, I think, do require further scrutiny, further work. Not before it can be added to Drupal core as an experimental module, but for it to become a stable module.
Right.
And so that's where I'm currently looking at things and making a proposal or making a single plan issue that says for each of those namespaces what should happen in the future going forward. And so I think 4 of them actually needs fixes in core, and then we can just remove them. Those are the field namespace. That's the thing that adds the file download URL thing. That's something that should just be fixed in core. The link manager, I think that's blocked on the link manager that exists in core already to be moved from the REST module to the serialization module, and then the JSON API module should be able to extend that to add its requirements. The resource response class and the interface, I think, well, that exists identically the same in the REST module. If that were moved to the serialization module, then the JSON API module would just be able to reuse that, plus the corresponding event subscriber. So that would also simplify things elsewhere a little bit. So that's already 3 things that should be able to go away as we refactor other parts of core and just improve things without breaking anything, really.
So even if it doesn't move, the resource response is only useful if we want to keep the renderability outside, sorry, as part of the controller. But if we move that out, as you were suggesting in one of the issues, we may be able to get by only by using the cacheable response object.
Okay. Well, yeah, that could work, but that's actually related to what I was saying about resource response. So the way that core currently works, the REST module has this resource response class, and the JSON API module basically just copy pasted it. It's identical, and you also copy pasted the original approach with how to deal with those responses, and it originally lived in the request handler class in the REST module, and for you in the JSON API module, it also lives there. But in core, since then, we've moved that logic into an event subscriber that handles resource response responses, and then transforms them to do the rendering that is necessary. So if the resource response class is moved outside of the REST module into the serialization module, we can reuse the same event subscriber for the JSON API module as well. And I think you're frozen. And maybe it's my connection. It is not my connection, I think. Nope. Let me pause my video. Maybe it helps.
Am I back?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Okay.
There's just one frozen version of you, though. Uh-oh, are you frozen again? I'll turn off my video.
Am I?
Oh, no, you're back.
Well, I don't know what's going on. My Wi-Fi keeps, my own Wi-Fi keeps kicking me out.
Maybe.
I don't think.
Okay, maybe it's stable again. Otherwise, we could choose to not use our video, if that helps.
Right, yeah. Sorry, I think I lost you right at the beginning of the request handler.
Damn it.
Yes,
okay.
No worries. It was a copy of the REST module.
Yes, and the REST module has since been changed so that it doesn't have that logic in the request handler in its controller anymore. It now has that logic in an event subscriber that detects responses that are being sent, and if it's a resource response response object, then it does the necessary transformations there in the event subscriber, so that the request handler doesn't need to deal with that sort of thing, because it's kind of out of its scope of responsibility. The beautiful thing would then be that JSON API module would also be able to use the logic in that event subscriber. So the event subscriber would apply just the same to responses sent by the JSON API module, and so then we wouldn't have to duplicate it anymore.
Nice. We're doing something extra, though.
Yes. So that might need additional attention, but that's that's something to be solved later then. Like, I don't know, I haven't figured out the details, but I know that it's changed in a way that is beneficial for JSON API as well.
Okay, cool. Yeah, yeah, that sounds fantastic, and it always cringed me.
Yeah.
The implementation,
Yep.
but I tried to kind of at least have the same pains and know
Yep.
that I would suffer it with
Yep.
the rest of the community. So all that makes sense, a lot of sense.
Awesome.
Even even the fact that having a front controller may not be the best of the ideas, but yeah.
What do you mean by that? Because it's not really a front controller in the strictest sense. In the strict sense, the front controller is index.php.
Right. Sorry. Yeah. For the JSON API subsystem of
Right.
sort. So we are only using one controller, and then
Yes.
we are using dynamic routing based on
Yes.
the parameters detected. So yeah, I kind of agree with the fact that all that needs to change, and so many things derived from the single decision and the fact that we acknowledge, okay, let's limit the scope of what JSON API can do, and it only can do entity types and bundles. And so many things were added as things like, but what if people want to extend it in such way that, so yeah, I think that all this cleanup is super needed, and it will make things very clear for people, because
Yes.
everyone assumes that it's going to be for entities anyways, right? So
Yes, and so my goal with all this is to get to a point where the JSON API module is in a state where it is equally maintainable and kind of invisible to an extent as the dynamic page cache module, as the BigPipe module, and similar scope of test coverage as the REST module has since the beginning of December. By which I mean to say, we should get it to a point where I and you and others spend quite a lot of time on getting the JSON API module to stable, but then have it be stable, truly stable, as in have it be so stable and so well tested that and without or with very, very little technical debt, so that we don't have to look at it again for years to come by matter of speech. So that
yes.
we can sleep at night and not worry that some big site that uses JSON API is going to come down crashing because of this one edge case that we didn't do. Like it is so worth it to spend a lot of time having very solid test coverage to prove that even edge cases are handled correctly, which was very painful to do in BigPipe, for example. But it paid off so much because I had essentially no bug reports in the last year. I only had minor things that were actually bugs in Drupal core in the render system, not in BigPipe. So yes, so it in that way it paid off so much that I would love to have the same here, because maintaining a lot of modules is a pain in the ass. And yeah, I've got the quick edit, the seek editor module, the render system kind of, the cache system kind of, and they're a pain to maintain. So spending a lot of time now to have it super solid, I think will pay off in the long run a lot.
Yep, I agree. I like the concept of making the module invisible.
Yes, and so to that extent, I do have, so I talked about which ones I think we can remove. So field, link manager, resource response. I think those can be factored away by improving core. But then there are the namespaces that are specific to JSON API. So those are the error namespace, field resolver, normalizer, query, and the routing/param namespace. And those all contain logic that is basically very tightly coupled to the JSON API spec, as in it is implementing the JSON API spec and making sure that this Drupal module behaves according to that spec. And so I think that those all already have test coverage, which is awesome. But I think that there are still some places there that need further scrutiny and further edge case testing. Because, for example, in the field resolver, there are quite a few issues still open with that. And that's fine, because it's gotten to a point where it's working. But I think spending some time to come up with a complete list of all the possible edge cases and then testing against those, I think that will make sure that we don't have such surprises in the future again. And so it's that sort of thing that I think would make sense to do after it lands as an experimental module, but before it becomes marked stable.
Exactly, and something else is that we could gain some exposure for people that know the entity query system a little bit more than myself, because I didn't even know that you could do entity queries now in that take into account sub-properties and not just the field value, and you have to pass the column, etc. So
right.
And some of the bug reports are around that. So
yep.
I also.
So that's basically the plan that I have, or the plan that I want to propose, and it sounds like you're generally on board. So I'll finish the write-up, and then you can I'll send it to you before posting it, and then you can give feedback. And then basically we are ready to so the requirements for an experimental module to be committed are basically have the patch meet all coding standards, so no complaints about coding standards by the automated PHP-CS tool. We've got a patch ready for that. No critical architecture bugs. I think we've also covered that now. And a plan towards a stable release. And I think that's basically what we just talked about. And so once the last few patches are committed, so I think there's currently 3 outstanding patches, and I think once those 3 are in, we can actually post an experimental patch and have the final stages begin, if you will.
Right. So the only thing that I would add, and this is just trying to make sure that if it makes sense or not, is do we need to add any kind of section on how if JSON API is added into core, how we can piggyback with the serialization and the REST system, so we can both benefit from improvements in those areas?
So I missed the very first thing you said. I didn't hear it properly, I think. So you said, how can we both benefit, but of what exactly?
So yeah, I'm not sure if we should add some sort of section in the plan outlining how we. That wouldn't be a plan. So something along the lines what we were discussing earlier around the normalizer for fields, or the
right. So
link
basically
manager.
missing normalization. Yes. No. I want to explicitly mention those things in the plan, because we need those things to happen for JSON API to become properly stable, because otherwise it would be duplicating things elsewhere in core. So I think that's something that needs to happen anyway.
Right. But instead of just or additionally to calling those out, is it worth thinking about anything that needs to be done in order to make sure that the serialization and the REST system and the JSON API work together, instead of just trying to reuse and move everything to the common dependency? Or maybe I'm just...
Yeah, I think the serialization module is that common dependency where things that are relevant to any RESTful, any module providing a RESTful API, I think that's where it lives. The REST module is a specific implementation of it. The JSON API module is another specific implementation of it. The serialization module provides only PHP infrastructure, and it doesn't provide any routes, any HTTP API. The REST and JSON API modules do provide that. So in my mind, that's what that is, but maybe I'm not entirely understanding you.
No, I guess that I have some idea in my head that is still in the formation phase, I guess.
Okay, well, we can still add it, right? Like, nothing is final here. Like, I'm sure
right.
you're not thinking of certain things anyway.
No, what I was trying to think if we need to do anything, given that this is like the second the second module that uses the serialization system, if that has any implication, because oftentimes when you do when you use some API, the second consumer of that API uncovers some abstraction or assumptions that were not. So I don't know. I guess that we're thinking along the lines of does this have any implication with the plan? So the fact that we introduce this second user of the serialization module into Drupal core, does it change anything? Or but I think it doesn't. So anyways.
I think it both does and doesn't. I think the serialization module conceptually remains the same, but I do think that a few things, like for example, the link manager, which has long been known to be belonging in the serialization module and not the REST module, because for example, there is this service called Entity Pilot where they allow you to basically sync content from dev to staging or vice versa. And they also use the HAL serialization, and the HAL module depends on the serialization module, but they don't need the REST module. The problem is, though, that the link manager lives in the REST module, which means that the HAL module must depend on the REST module, which means that even though they don't need or want it, they are still exposing things via REST. And it's that sort of problem that is made more explicit and more urgent by having JSON API in core as well. Right. And another one is the resource response class and interface. Those currently live in the REST module as well, because that was the only user of it. So it didn't make sense yet to have it in the serialization module in the past. But now actually it does make sense. So I think it's that sort of thing, and maybe we'll discover more of those. And I think that's fine. I think that's a natural part of things evolving and reacting to new core modules, but also new contrib modules. So I think that's basically what you're getting at, but I don't think we can plan ahead for everything.
Yeah, no, I don't think it has a place inside of the plan.
No, I agree. The plan should just focus on what the JSON API module needs to become stable. And that may very well involve changes elsewhere because of wrong assumptions in, for example, the entity API or the config API or whatever API. And we'll just need to work through those.
Cool. I know that we are a little bit over here, but is there anything that you think that we should discuss before we call it a meeting?
I have one thing, and it's an issue that I filed, I think, a week ago or so. I just mentioned it in IRC, but I don't think you've had a chance yet to look at it. Basically, paste the link. This issue. The title is JSON API format should only be used on JSON API routes, but can also be used for REST resources. I think this may be a critical thing that we still need to solve before posting it as an experimental module, or it may be major. I'm not entirely certain. I also don't see a super elegant way for it to be solved, although Damien Lee just had a pretty good suggestion that I'm currently checking out whether it's possible. But I think personally that it's quite a big problem if you can create a view, a REST export view, or say a user REST resource or a node REST resource, and assign the JSON API format to it. Because then you're using the JSON API format, the serialization formats, on non-JSON API routes, which then, I'm not sure what that would mean for the links, the link headers that the JSON API responses send. I think it effectively means undefined behavior. yeah, that's my main concern, that the JSON API module should only have its format used on its own routes and not anywhere else.
Yeah, I think that kind of blends a little bit with the idea of dropping the format negotiation as a query string, a spike that I closed last week. So right now, we are. I think that we are doing a correct use of the format as the concept in Drupal 8, but it may be unnecessary because at this moment what we are using this is just it's kind of a global variable that is stored very early on in the bootstrap cycle, so we can catch exceptions that happen before we negotiate the route, and we serialize those exceptions in the JSON API format. So the idea behind using that format is, to reuse all that. However, by declaring a format, we also get a lot of unwanted, gosh, word I failing here.
Consequences?
Yeah, exactly. Or even features that by exposing a new format you get. So maybe we should avoid declaring a new format as we are doing, because we could get by with the serialization system. We are just passing a string, right? So if we didn't declare the format at the and I'm going back to my code because I forgot how this is done already. Yeah, I think there's an event subscriber. No, that's
yes, there is. You've got a default exception subscriber in the JSON API module that extends the one in the serialization module.
Yeah, no. No, I'm trying to find where maybe. Gosh. Well, anyways, I can't seem to find the place where the format is declared, and therefore
the JSON API service provider thing.
Yeah, exactly. So right, that's why I couldn't find it, because it's at the root. So if we dropped this, what would be the consequence? Because this wouldn't be discoverable for views, for instance. But we could still, if we somehow knew that this is in a JSON API context, we could still just use it in the serialization system. So that could be a way out. But I think that the use that we are doing now of formats is correct. But
yes, but I think so. This is pretty confusing. But the thing you just mentioned, so the JSON API service provider, it's registering a new format with the negotiation middleware, and I think there's no way around us keeping that. Like we need that to happen in order for even requests with request bodies to be handled correctly. The thing that we may need to consider changing or dropping is in the JSON API.services.yaml, where we are specifying the serializer.encoder.json API service. That is a thing that declares itself as the API_JSON format. And us dropping that means that the serialization system is blissfully unaware of this API JSON format. So it's just a serialization system being unaware. The place that you were talking about was the request processing system being unaware. And the serialization system being unaware of this API JSON format would mean that the REST module is also unaware, so that you wouldn't be able to configure the JSON API format for REST resources. So I think that's where there's a distinction there, and I know it's tricky, but I think maybe that's where we need to look, and that's kind of what Damien Lee was getting at in IRC, he was suggesting that the JSON API module would not use Core's serializer service, but would have its own serializer service, and that would only deal with JSON API normalizers and encoders. And
right.
Maybe that would work, but I personally don't fully understand it. But it sounds like you do. I was planning to dig into that right after this call.
So when I said that the serialization system doesn't know about these registered formats because we keep passing the format as a parameter in every call, I meant symphonies. So maybe that's the trick that we need to do. We need to have our own serializer.
Yep. Maybe.
No, not sure. Maybe the format or REST should make sure, or the format negotiation should be explicit about what this format can be used of, the capabilities, and then REST could check on that. Like
that's what I looked into as well. Have for example. So JSON API is not the only module facing this sort of problem. I know at least of one other example, the Acquia Content Hub module. It also has its own custom formats, and it has the same consequence. You are technically able to configure that format for any REST resource, but that's kind of not what you want, because it won't work for everything. It will only work for the things it's meant to support, and it's actually only meant to be used on its own routes and not anywhere else. That sort of thing. So it's the same problem space. But the problem is that if we make certain formats, say REST specific, so we could add another flag that says not only name encoder, priority 21, format API JSON, but then also something like REST specific, true or false. I'm just saying something like that. Mm-hmm. Then the consequence would be that the exception subscriber will not work for your format. So the serialization module's exception subscriber won't work. But then the interesting thing is that for the JSON API module, that doesn't matter because it has its own exception subscriber, because it needs its own special stuff for the data wrapper stuff. And so for us, it wouldn't matter, but for others, it would. All I'm getting at is it's a general problem. It's not specific to the JSON API module per se. Yeah. But I fear that it's something that we need to solve at least in some way before it can be added to core, because otherwise there is one potential way in which the JSON API module could be disruptive. It's when people set up a new REST resource and enable the JSON API format on it, then they are not able anymore to simply uninstall the JSON API module, because technically it's possible for their REST resource to be sending and accepting content in JSON API format.
And it's just plain confusing.
Yes, it is.
Because we have already had bug reports for that. Hey, I'm using views and I cannot see a decent result, and that kind of stuff. I think it's a tricky problem. And
it is. It's something that the design of the serialization system simply didn't take into account, right? It's a complete oversight.
Yeah, I think that we may be able to do a workaround with the current system, but I think that just the ability to do what we are describing is not possible with the tools in the present state. So maybe we need to update the tools. So
So do you agree that that is the one thing that is also still very important to fix before post an experimental patch? Or maybe we can already post it, but we can say this one more thing is in progress, but you can review everything else already.
So what I think is that this is not a JSON API problem. True. And so the patch doesn't change, or it changes very minimally.
Yes.
If we do this, in core at the serialization level. I would not block creating the patch. I would add a node saying, hey, this is still very real. We cannot do anything here, but whenever this is fixed, it will be just maybe adding some kind of extra parameter to the format discovery or the alter that we are doing in the service provider, or maybe it's some other way, but it should be something very minimal, right? It would be something to either blacklist some formats, or allow the JSON API to blacklist itself for the REST module, or just require the other ones to whitelist themselves, or some other system. But
we can't require others to whitelist themselves simply because that would be a backwards compatibility break. So we'd have to do the explicit blacklisting. But I think that can work. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it would be very minimal, and I wouldn't just block the whole patch on that.
Yep. So you would say that this is something of priority major, not critical.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. That's the one issue, but it's a pretty tricky one, as you can tell. That's the one issue I wanted to bring up.
Yeah, because I would hate to just add a variable to exclude from REST, and then discover that there is another, I don't know, another module or another scenario that we didn't think of that also needs an independent exclusion flag, and we keep adding flags instead of describing semantically what this format has that it's special, like in comparison to REST, for instance, right? But yeah, that is the discussion for that other issue, which is outside of JSON API.
All right.
Cool.
So then I think we're done.
So yeah, I think we're done. I'm feeling not very optimistic this week, because it feels like the bad attack is kind of looming, and it's happening soon. And yeah, I'm not sure if we will be able to make it. But what do you feel?
I think it will depend more on the availability of framework managers, core committers, product managers to make a decision than it will on us.
Right. Yeah.
Because the RTBC queue is pretty long already, and well, it's the proposal for adding JSON API as an experimental module has been posted for 25 days, and there has been no response from framework managers or product managers. So I'm not sure. Like it's been the holiday period, of course. That doesn't help, but yeah, I think they're just overloaded, and if anything, that's going to be unfortunately the cause, which is understandable, but unfortunate.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in any case, I mean, this can just follow its course.
Yes. Yes. Then it would be super stable in 8.4.
Right. Yeah. But yeah. Anyways, let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. Maybe.
Yes. Yes.
Maybe I'm just not very optimistic this week. I was last week, though. So maybe next
and we
week.
made so much progress, so
yeah.
You should be more optimistic, if anything. But I understand. I agree. I'm also a bit hesitant.
That is true, but I also realized that there were some implications that I didn't foresee of things that could be simplified by the fact that we are not serving any possible use case in the future, or providing so much extensibility that any country module can add its own flavor of things in there. So now that we can simplify the code, I feel like we should as soon as possible. So it also
I agree.
It also opened some more extra work, solving more issues, creating more issues.
But
if that makes sense.
Yes, but at the same time, I think it ensures. So you say it created work, and that's true. But I think it created work that allows you to say it's done faster, because before you decided, or we all agreed together, that it would make sense to limit the scope or limit the extensibility of the JSON API module. Before that, back when it was still super extensible in every way possible, that meant that technically you would have had to work on crazy complex and extensive test coverage for you to be certain that it would work in all cases.
Yeah.
Now it's much more doable to provide something that is truly rock solid.
Yeah, you can at least have an idea of what needs to happen.
Yes, that's another way to put it.
Yeah, cool, perfect. Oh, we went way off, but I think this was a great meeting. Love.
Yeah, it was very helpful.
Cool. I guess
right.
I'll talk to you in IRC.
Yep. Have a good week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.